Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Piet van der Graaf, Senior VP at Certara, a company providing predictive simulation, data-driven modeling, and AI tailored for drug development. Welcome, Piet.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
So today we'll be discussing the potential of digital twins in rare disease research and drug development. With over 7,000 rare diseases affecting an estimated 30 million people in the US alone, these conditions have long been underfunded and under-researched, leaving patients with limited options. However, virtual trials are emerging as a breakthrough. Before we sink our teeth into our central topic, though, Piet, perhaps you could share with listeners a little bit about your background and the journey that led you to doing what you do today at Certara.
Yeah, sure, Nicole. So I suppose the common theme of my journey, which has now been almost 35 years working in pharma, has been modeling and simulation. So as a master's student almost 35 years ago, unlike all my fellow students, I wasn't particularly keen to do a lab-based research project. And I managed to find a project which was called chemometrics in those days. So this was kind of applying data science to link properties of structures to pharmacological properties such as pharmacokinetics. So that's where I got really interested in modeling and simulation, data science, machine learning. So I then moved to London to do my PhD with Sir James Black, and he taught me how to use modeling and simulation to understand interaction of ligands and biological systems. So he called that analytical pharmacology, and that really kind of taught me how this can be applied in a kind of drug discovery setting. I then felt I would need to kind of learn how to apply that to in vivo systems. So went to Leiden University, where I learned about pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic modeling. And then finally moved to Pfizer, where I learned about pharmacometrics, which is the kind of equivalent of chemometrics, but then applied to pharmaceutical research, set up the preclinical modeling and simulation group. And that evolved into the discipline that we'll talk about later, quantitative systems pharmacology. After Pfizer, I set up a small company with a former Pfizer colleague, and we sold that to Certara in 2015. And that's where I am now, heading up the industry largest group focusing on mechanistic modeling and simulation called quantitative systems pharmacology.
Thank you for that, Piet. Quite a journey. So we're going to unpack some of that for our listeners. And as you say, come to this main theme of data systems pharmacology. So you've been seeing firsthand that virtual trials offer a cost-effective and efficient way to collect data and drive clinical trial innovation. So I was wondering if you could explain for our listeners the growing role of digital twins and virtual trials in speeding up drug approvals generally, to sort of set the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe first let me start by explaining what is a digital or virtual twin. So it's really an in silico model on a computer of a physical object or a person or a process. And we use the digital twin to simulate its behavior to better understand how it works in real life. Now, importantly, the digital twin needs to be able to interact with its environment. So to read data, update the model. So it's a very dynamic kind of model, of course. Now, they've been around for quite some time in a variety of industries like automotive, aerospace, defense, retail, consumer goods. And actually, most people will have several digital twins on their mobile phones, such as a map linked to GPS and real-time traffic data to optimize your car journey, or like a weather app. Now, digital twins are also increasingly used in healthcare. Think, for example, about smartwatches with health and fitness trackers. Now, in recent years, digital twins have also entered pharmaceutical R&D, and they are increasingly being used in drug discovery and development. Now, in the context of pharma R&D, a digital twin is a virtual model of an actual patient that mirrors their biological, genetic, clinical, pharmacological, behaviors. But the main advantage of using digital twins in drug development is that they allow for simulations of virtual trials, where we can explore questions about a therapeutic before involving real patients. And when I say virtual trial, this could be an N of 1 trial in a single digital twin representing one individual, or a larger trial of many digital twins and virtual patients. Now, the use of digital twins can shorten the timelines of clinical trials due to better designs, reduce costs because fewer trial iterations are needed. And also they increase the probability of success because optimal doses, optimal dose regimens, optimal combinations, and patient subgroups can be identified ahead of clinical testing. So ultimately, the impact of digital twin technology is that every patient will receive the right medicine at the right dose.
Thank you for that, Piet. I mean, it's fascinating science and, as you say, impactful for that personalization. So if we go into sort of finer detail now, I believe you're also the co-author of a study on Pompe disease that highlights how these digital twins can transform clinical trials. So if we take what you've just been describing for us on digital twins, how do digital twins simulate real world patient responses specifically and predict those treatment outcomes and reduce, as you've been saying, the need for large trials? I mean, we've gotten down to the individual level.
Yeah, so as I briefly mentioned earlier, the actual technology underlying digital twins in drug development is called quantitative systems pharmacology, or QSP in brief. Now, broadly speaking, QSP is the quantitative analysis of the dynamic interaction between drugs and biological systems. And it applies concepts of system engineering, systems biology, and quantitative pharmacology to really study and model the complex biological systems through iterations of computational modeling on the one hand and experimentation and clinical trials on the other hand. Now, the outputs of QSP models are virtual patients, and they can be personalized and then they become digital twins. So initially, a QSP model is developed based on prior knowledge. So the prior knowledge can include anything ranging from, for example, fundamental understanding of the disease pathophysiology and the drug's mechanism of action, pharmacology, pharmacokinetics, results from clinical trials with the actual drug or maybe other drugs for the same disease, biomarkers, omics data, etc., etc. Now, from this initial QSP base model, we can then simulate the predicted response to a therapeutic for a typical average virtual patient. However, because we know, of course, that not all patients respond in the same manner, the next step is to introduce biological variability into the model. For example, let's assume that our drug target is an enzyme expressed in liver cells. Then we can immediately think of already two factors that may influence the response: how many liver cells a patient has and how much enzyme is expressed in each cell. Now, if we assume, for the sake of simplicity, that an individual has an average high or low number of liver cells, and similarly an average high or low number of enzymes expressed in each liver cell, then we already have 9 potential different patient phenotypes. Now, because a typical QSP model often contains dozens, if not hundreds of biological variables, the number of possible different virtual patients will quickly grow to thousands, and their responses can span a wide range of clinical outcomes. However, now we can calibrate that model with actual clinical data to ensure that the range of the predicted outputs matches the observed between patient variability in actual clinical trials in real patients. Now, once we have achieved this, the final step is then to match the observed data for each individual patient with a unique profile generated by the QSP model. And now we have our digital twin.
Thank you for that, Pete. So it's sort of self-explanatory at this point, the potential that this lends to rare disease R&D. But I was just wondering, to make it crystal clear for listeners, when it comes to the role of virtual trials in collecting remote data to overcome small sample sizes and rare diseases, I know we've been talking about digital twins, but this role of virtual trials, perhaps, can you broaden out on that for us?
Yeah, sure. So as said, a digital twin is just one virtual patient in a virtual trial output. So we can run kind of virtual trials with hundreds, if not thousands, of virtual patients we can mimic the design of an actual planned clinical trial exactly to kind of match it in the way that it would kind of be run in, real life. But the advantage is, of course, that we can simulate many, many virtual trials and just explore optimal design, optimal dose regimens, before we run the actual trial. So it really gives us the opportunity to explore the best way to run a clinical trial before we invest in what is typically a very costly and lengthy kind of process to run the, real life trial.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's segue now and put on our regulatory hats, if you will. How are regulators incorporating AI and machine learning to streamline the approval process, ensuring faster and safer drug development?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, regulators have really embraced, modeling and simulation, which includes, quantitative system pharmacology, AI, but also digital twins and virtual twins, really kind of heavily over the last years. So, for example, there was a recent paper by FDA that showed that the number of regulatory submissions supported by QSP models has grown exponentially in the recent decades. And it was actually just before this meeting, Nicole, reading the annual report of the FDA's Office of Clinical Pharmacology, where they summarize the impact of QSP on regulatory decision making. And I cite from the report, it's just 2 sentences. So what they say is, QSP mechanistically and quantitatively integrates biological drug and clinical trial information to model and simulate drug response and variability in patient responses to inform drug development, decisions. QSP staff played a key role in reviewing QSP models, gaining critical information, and here comes the important bits, on dosing in patients who were not able to be studied in clinical trials, and the safest way to actually address the missed doses. So here they kind of talk really about digital twins in the context that there are clinical trials where, for whatever reasons, some patients may have missed a dose or were not dosed at all. And what they say is that these mechanistic models can kind of almost substitute the missing data in such trials.
Thank you for sharing that, Piet. And it goes back to that well-known knowledge of the poison is in the dose type.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, my final question for today. What do you believe the future horizon of AI employment in R&D will look like in terms of the virtual trials and digital twins of tomorrow?
Yeah, so there's many things I can think of, but let me just kind of highlight a few. So first of all, an area that I'm very excited about is called synthetic controls. And this was highlighted in a very recent paper in Lancet Digital Health. So here's the idea that can we use models, virtual trials, digital twins, to substitute particularly, the placebo groups in exoclinical trials. And the application here is, I think, most obvious in pediatric rare diseases, where obviously, first of all, you only have a very, very small number of patients, given the fact that it is a rare disease. And for ethical reasons, it's highly undesirable to have patients on, on a treatment arm where they actually do not receive the treatment. So the question here is, how can we kind of use modeling and simulation to kind of help there? And I think digital twin is really the answer for that. The second point I would like to make is that I really think digital twins further opens up, diversity and equity in drug developments. Because basically we can kind of make digital twins of anyone, right? So we can really kind of make sure that we kind of fulfill our remits, which is finding the right medicine and the right dose for every individual. And lastly, a very hot and exciting new topic is adding organ-on-a-chip technology to the digital twin. So here you can see we can start to create what we've started to call virtual triplets. Mm-hmm. So the triplet is the actual patient, it's digital twin, and then on the organ-on-a-chip, the patient kind of in an experimental setting. So that kind of triangle, I think, is really going to be very exciting in the coming years.
Exciting indeed. Thank you for sharing, Piet. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast.
You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.